You can't be so selfish, Zach, my mother yelled before her hand flew across the elegant riverside restaurant, hitting my face with a smack that echoed among the tables. The silence was instantaneous. 70 guests at my prom party stopped talking, their forks suspended in midair, all eyes fixed on us. The manager who was serving champagne froze midway to a nearby table. My right cheek throbbed as I looked at Linda Patterson, my 53-year-old mother, who still held her hand raised as if to hit me again. "Mom," I said calmly, touching my face where a red mark was already forming, "you just assaulted me in front of all my colleagues because I refused to give my $100,000 bonus to Jessica. My name is Zach Patterson, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I would be publicly beaten by my own family on what should have been the most important night of my career. But after 15 years of watching my parents indulge my younger sister's every whim while I worked 3 jobs to pay for my own college education, maybe I should have seen this coming." The Riverside restaurant had been my choice to celebrate my promotion to Director of Software Development at TechFlow Solutions. I had reserved the private room, paid for it out of my own pocket, and invited colleagues, friends, and family to share this milestone that represented years of sacrifice and dedication. The irony of being humiliated at my own event did not go unnoticed. My father, Robert, stood next to my mother with that uncomfortable expression he always wore when things got tense. My 28-year-old sister, Jessica, stood slightly behind them, checking her phone as if the family explosion were just a minor inconvenience. "It wasn't assault," my mother said, finally lowering her hand but keeping her voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "It was a necessary correction. Jessica needs this money to save her business, and you're being cruel by refusing to help your own sister." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure as I felt the eyes of Sarah Mitchell, my boss and CEO of TechFlow, watching my every move from a nearby table. Next to her, the other company directors watched the family drama unfold. "The business she started 6 months ago with no experience?" I asked, keeping my voice low in the hope that my family would take the hint. "The handmade jewelry online store she abandoned after 3 weeks because it was too much work." Jessica finally looked up from her phone, her face taking on that victimized expression she had perfected over the years. "That's not how it happened," she said in a tearful voice. "I had problems with suppliers and legal complications. Now I found an amazing opportunity to expand into sustainable products, but I need startup capital." The pattern was so familiar it almost hurt. Jessica announced a new venture, received initial enthusiasm and money from her parents, faced the first real obstacle, abandoned it, and then blamed external circumstances for the failure. Meanwhile, I had worked consistently since I was 16, saved every penny I could, and built my career brick by brick. The $100,000 bonus I received with my promotion represented not only professional recognition but years of careful financial planning. "Zach," my father finally interjected, his voice carrying that tone of disappointment he reserved for when I didn't give in to family demands. "Jessica isn't asking for a handout. It's a loan. She'll pay every penny back." I almost laughed. Jessica had never paid back a penny of anything in her life. How is she going to pay it back when she doesn't even have a steady source of income? I asked, watching as the conversation was drawing even more attention from the other guests. That's when my mother exploded again. "You've always been selfish," she yelled, pointing her finger at me. "Ever since you were a child, saving your birthday money while your sister shared everything. Now that you're finally in a position to help the family, you show your true colors." The words hit me like punches. I had saved money because I knew that if I didn't, I would never have anything. Every time I got something, there was pressure to share it with Jessica or contribute to some family project that inevitably benefited only her. But as my mother continued her speech about family responsibility, I kept my expression neutral. She didn't realize that I had already mentally cataloged every manipulation, every emotional blackmail, every toxic pattern that our family had normalized over the years. If you're following this family manipulation story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple refusal would become the catalyst for revelations none of us were prepared to face. What she didn't know was that while she was planning this party, I had carefully documented years of family loans that were never repaid. And that documentation was about to change everything. "You don't understand," Jessica whispered, tears welling up in her perfectly made-up blue eyes. "I've lost everything. My vendors are suing me, my apartment is being evicted next week, and I have nowhere to go." It was the same performance she had perfected since she was 16. The trembling voice, the abandoned puppy look, the the vulnerable posture that turned any confrontation into a rescue session. And it worked. It always worked. My father immediately took her side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Do you see what you're doing to your sister?" he accused me, his voice heavy with moral indignation. "She's desperate, Zach. She needs real help, not your lectures on financial responsibility." I took a deep breath, looking around the room where my colleagues were discreetly trying to pretend they weren't witnessing the collapse of my family life. Sarah Mitchell, my boss, had risen from her table and was walking toward us with a concerned expression. "Dad," I said calmly, "do you remember the Pilates studio Jessica opened 2 years ago? The one you and Mom invested $15,000 in." My father's face hardened. That was different. The market changed, the competition. And the artisanal candy business? I interrupted. Another $8,000. And before that, the vintage clothing online store? 5,000 more. Shall I go on? "Those were learning lessons," my mother interjected, her voice still too loud for the room. "Jessica is an entrepreneur. She thinks big, she has vision. Not every business venture is successful on the first try." "How many attempts, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. "Because as I count, that's 9 learning lessons in the last 5 years. That's $53,000 you've invested that she's never paid back." Jessica sobbed louder. "You're being cruel, Zach. I always intended to pay it back." "With what money?" I cut in. "You haven't had a steady job in 3 years. Every time you get something, you complain that it's below your potential and quit within a few weeks." Sarah Mitchell arrived at our table at that exact moment, her expression professional but clearly uncomfortable. "Zach," she said softly, "perhaps it would be best if you continued this conversation in a more private setting?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment. This was Sarah Mitchell, the CEO who had promoted me, witnessing my family publicly humiliate me. Beside her, other executives watched with expressions ranging from embarrassment to morbid curiosity. "You're right," I agreed, starting to stand. "Family, let's take this outside." "No," my mother said firmly, remaining seated. "This won't take long. Zach just needs to sign a check and everyone can get back to having fun." The brutal simplicity of that statement left me speechless for a moment. She really believed she could force me to hand over $100,000 right there, in front of my colleagues, as if it were a routine transaction. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said diplomatically, "I understand that family matters are important, but perhaps—" "Excuse me," my mother cut in, turning to Sarah with a hostile expression. "This is a private family matter. Zach is an adult and can make his own decisions." Sarah blinked, clearly surprised by the aggressive tone. As the CEO of a $200 million technology company, she was rarely dismissed so rudely. "Mom," I said through clenched teeth, "you're being incredibly disrespectful to my boss." "His boss?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "Zach, you work with computers. It's not like you're a doctor or a lawyer. It's just a job." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah Mitchell, who had built one of the most innovative software companies in the country, looked at Jessica as if she had just insulted her religion. "Just a job." Sarah repeated slowly. I could see the catastrophe unfolding in real time. My family had no idea who these people were or what position I had achieved. To them, I was still the same Zach from 20 years ago, working in tech support to pay for college. "Jessica," I said calmly, "I'd like to introduce Sarah Mitchell, CEO of TechFlow Solutions. The company that just promoted me to Director of Development, with a salary package of $300,000 a year plus bonuses." My sister's face paled, but my father simply shook his head impatiently. "No matter how much you make, family comes first," he declared. "If you can't help your own sister when she needs you, what kind of person does that make you?" That was the moment something changed in me. It wasn't anger, although that was certainly present. It was clarity. For years, I had internalized their narrative. I was selfish for saving money. I was insensitive for not helping with each new financial crisis Jessica faced. I was ungrateful for questioning where my parents' money was really going. But there, in front of my professional colleagues, seeing the utter lack of respect for my achievement and my autonomy, I finally understood that I wasn't the one who was wrong. "Family comes first," I repeated slowly. Interesting philosophy, Dad. Do you remember when I needed help with the down payment on my first house? When I asked you for a $5,000 loan that I would pay back in 6 months? He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. We were going through financial difficulties. But 3 weeks later, you bought Jessica that $22,000 convertible because hers didn't fit her professional image. That was different, my mother protested. She needed reliable transportation for job interviews. Job interviews, I laughed humorlessly. For jobs she turned down because the starting salary wasn't compatible with her education. Sarah Mitchell cleared her throat softly. Maybe I should let you two talk. No, I said firmly. Actually, Sarah, there's something I'd like you to know about my family. My parents exchanged nervous glances. Jessica stopped crying abruptly, her eyes widening with alarm. Zach, my mother warned, what are you doing? I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally decided to stop protecting people who had never protected him. I'm being transparent, I replied. After all, family comes first, right? As Sarah leaned forward slightly, showing genuine interest, I pulled out my phone. On it, I had a carefully organized folder that I had been compiling for months. What are you doing? Jessica asked, her voice rising an octave. Sharing our family history, I replied calmly. Since you insist on making it public. What they didn't know was that I had meticulously documented every family loan from the past 10 years. Every broken promise, every emotional manipulation, every instance where they had prioritized Jessica's whims over any responsibility or respect. And now, for the first time, I was ready to use that documentation. The look of panic on my parents' faces told me they finally understood that this wasn't going to be another easy win for them. Documentation, my mother repeated, her voice trembling slightly. What kind of documentation? Sarah Mitchell remained at my side, clearly intrigued by the unfolding situation. Other colleagues began to approach discreetly, forming a semicircle of witnesses that turned our table into a small theater. Well, I began, sliding my finger across the phone screen. Let's start with the loan from December 2021. Jessica asked for $8,000 to invest in baking equipment for her artisan bakery. Zach, my father warned, his face reddening, that's private family business. Private. I laughed humorlessly. You chose to make it private when you decided to attack me at my prom. Now it's public. Sarah crossed her arms, watching with the attention of someone accustomed to analyzing data and patterns. Next to her, David Chun, my fellow director, had discreetly pulled out his phone, clearly recording. The bakery lasted exactly 5 weeks, I continued, scrolling through the folder on my phone. Jessica closed, claiming that the local market wasn't ready for gourmet products. The $8,000 was never returned. She had to pay suppliers, my mother protested weakly. Interesting, I replied, tapping the screen again. Because I have a WhatsApp conversation here where Jessica admits to our cousin Amanda that she spent half the money on clothes to build a professional image as a pastry chef. Jessica turned pale instantly. You have no right to read my private conversations. Conversations that Amanda showed me because she was concerned about her behavior, I corrected. Want me to continue? The silence around our table intensified. I noticed that other guests at nearby tables were also paying attention, whispering among themselves. In March 2022, I continued, Jessica convinced you to refinance the house to lend her $15,000 for her revolutionary healthy food delivery startup. My father shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. The app was never developed, I continued relentlessly. Because Jessica discovered that programming was more complicated than it looked, and decided to outsource the work. To developers in India who, unsurprisingly, disappeared with half the money. These things happen in the business world, my mother tried to defend, but her voice sounded less and less convincing. 5 months later, I continued, you lent her another $12,000 for the intensive digital marketing course that was supposed to make Jessica an influencer. A course that cost $1,200. Sarah Mitchell raised an eyebrow. As a CEO, she knew exactly how much legitimate digital marketing courses cost. Where did the other $10,800 go? I asked rhetorically. Well, there are some interesting transactions on Jessica's credit card during that period. A trip to Cancun with her friends, spa treatments, a new wardrobe for networking. That's a lie. Jessica exploded, tears streaming down her face. You're twisting everything. I'm reading bank statements and credit card records, I replied calmly. Do you want me to show you the screenshots? It was then that David Chun, who had remained silent until that moment, spoke up. Sorry to interrupt, he said, looking directly at my parents, but I'm trying to understand the math here. You lent at least $35,000 to ventures that were clearly not viable, but now you're demanding that Zach hand over $100,000 that he earned legitimately. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but David continued. As a CFO, I see a lot of business proposals. The failure rate for inexperienced entrepreneurs without a solid business plan is about 90% in the first year. David, Sarah said softly, could you explain to us what a responsible strategy would be in this situation? It was a brilliant rhetorical question. Sarah was essentially forcing my family to listen to a lecture on financial responsibility from one of the most respected executives at the company. Well, David began, assuming his professorial tone. First, any family investment should have proper documentation. Clear contracts, payment schedules, consequences for default. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Second, David continued, repeated investments in failed ventures without proper risk analysis is, frankly, poor financial management. It's money thrown away. We're supporting our daughter, my father protested. No, David corrected firmly, you're enabling irresponsible behavior and jeopardizing your own financial stability in the process. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. David is right. At TechFlow, we wouldn't re-evaluate contracts with suppliers who consistently failed. Why should family be any different? It was at that moment that I realized something important. For the first time in my life, there were people on my side who understood business logic and financial responsibility. People who weren't swayed by emotional manipulation or distorted family obligations. There's more, I announced, feeling a wave of confidence grow within me. Jessica, do you remember the medical emergency last September? She stopped crying abruptly, her eyes widening in panic. The appendicitis that needed urgent surgery, she continued. The one our parents paid $8,000 for because your health insurance didn't cover it. Zach, she whispered, please. Except that I called the hospital the following week, concerned about your recovery, I revealed. I found out there was no surgery. You were treated in the emergency room for common abdominal pain and discharged the same day with a diagnosis of gastritis. The silence that followed was deafening. $8,000, I repeated, for a doctor's appointment that cost $300. Money you took out of your retirement savings. My mother collapsed into her chair, the weight of the revelation finally hitting her. My father stared at Jessica as if he were seeing her for the first time. This is fraud, Sarah said calmly. Medical fraud, to be specific. It was at that moment that I made my final decision. I looked around the table, at the shocked faces of my colleagues, at the look of betrayal in my parents' eyes, at the absolute panic on Jessica's face. Mom, Dad, I said with a calmness that surprised even me, you have a choice to make. You can continue to support Jessica's lies and manipulation, destroying your own financial stability in the process, or you can start demanding accountability. I stood up from my chair, adjusting my jacket. But let me make one thing clear, this is the last penny Jessica will receive from any member of this family without real consequences. You can't tell us what to do with our money, my father protested, but his voice sounded defeated. You're right, I agreed. But I can decide what to do with mine. And I can decide if I want to continue participating in a system that rewards lies and punishes honesty. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. Zach, she said, your promotion includes optional relocation to our new branch in Seattle. If you want to accept, we can discuss the details on Monday. It was an offer that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. Sarah was offering me a physical way out of this situation, a chance to start over far away from the toxicity of my family. Thanks, Sarah, I replied. I'll give it serious thought. As I prepared to leave my own party, Jessica made one last desperate attempt. Zach, wait, she called, her voice breaking. I can explain everything. Things got out of hand, but I never meant to hurt anyone. I stopped and turned to face her. Jessica, I said softly, you've had 9 opportunities over 5 years to be honest. 9 chances to show responsibility, to honor commitments, to stop lying. I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. This was your 10th. And you chose more lies, more manipulation, more violence. I looked her straight in the eyes. There won't be a 11th chance. I left the restaurant with Sarah and David by my side, leaving my family to process the consequences of years of denial. But as I walked toward the car, I knew this was only the first step in something much bigger. Because my paperwork wasn't just about family loans. There was something else, something I had discovered the week before that would change everything forever. Something that would make my family understand that underestimating Zach Patterson was the biggest mistake they ever made. The following Monday, I woke up with a clarity of mind I hadn't experienced in years. The public humiliation at the party had been a catalyst, but what I had discovered the week before would be the real game changer. Sarah Mitchell greeted me in her office at 9 in the morning, coffee already brewed and a folder on the table. "The Seattle offer is real," she began without preamble. "But before you decide, I want you to know that we don't tolerate employees being disrespected by anyone. Family included." I smiled, lightly touching the mark that still lingered on my face. "Thanks, Sarah. But before we talk about relocation, there's something I need to share with you. Something related to my family that may affect my position here." She raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair. "Last Saturday before the party, I received a call from the State Department of Financial Investigations. Apparently, my name came up in some suspicious transactions related to my sister's business." Sarah's expression became deeply serious. "What kind of transactions?" I took a deep breath. "Jessica used my identity to open business bank accounts. 3 different banks, all using my social security number and personal information. She's been laundering money through shell companies for at least 2 years." Sarah leaned forward. As the CEO of a financial technology company, she immediately understood the implications. "How much money are we talking about?" $350,000 that I've been able to track down. Possibly more." "Jesus," she muttered. "Were you aware of these accounts?" "I didn't even know they existed until we got the investigative call. Apparently, one of Jessica's investors was arrested for fraud and started cooperating with the authorities." I opened my laptop and showed Sarah the documents I had collected over the weekend. "These are screenshots of the bank accounts Jessica opened using my identity. Note the dates. They all coincide with the period she claimed to be developing her various businesses." Sarah examined the images carefully. "Zach, you understand that this could affect your security clearance here at the company?" "I understand completely. That's why I came straight to you. I want complete transparency about the situation." "Have you hired a lawyer?" "Yes. Marcus Hartwell, of Hartwell and Associates. He specializes in white-collar financial crimes." Sarah nodded approvingly. Marcus Hartwell was known in town as one of the best criminal defense attorneys around. "What does your lawyer recommend?" "Full cooperation with the investigation and civil action against Jessica to recover damages. But there's a complication." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "My parents don't know about the fraudulent accounts. They genuinely believe they're helping Jessica with legitimate business ventures. If I report Jessica to the authorities, they could also face consequences as unwitting accomplices." Sarah frowned. "Did they provide money for these schemes?" $53,000 over 2 years. All documented as family loans, but in reality it was funding money laundering operations. "What a mess," Sarah muttered, shaking her head. "Exactly. And that's why I need your guidance. As an employee of TechFlow, what is my ethical obligation here?" Sarah was silent for a few moments, clearly processing the implications. "Your obligation is to protect your own integrity and that of the company," she said finally. "If you're being investigated for financial crimes, even if you're a victim, we need this resolved quickly and transparently." "I agree completely. What's your plan?" I smiled for the first time that morning. "I'm already implementing it." Over the weekend, while my family was probably still processing the public humiliation of the party, I had spent 48 hours meticulously compiling evidence. "I hired a forensic accounting firm," I explained. "They're tracking every penny that's gone through those fraudulent accounts. I've also retained a private investigator to document Jessica's current activities." A private investigator? Thomas Reynolds. Former FBI, specializing in financial fraud. He's already discovered that Jessica is currently attempting to open more bank accounts using other people's information. Sarah leaned back in her chair, impressed. You're not messing around. Not when my career and reputation are on the line. I opened another folder on my laptop. This is even more interesting. Reynolds discovered that Jessica is in regular contact with other entrepreneurs who operate similar schemes. It's an organized network. A network. At least 12 people in 4 states. They share tactics, fake documents, and even clients. Jessica isn't just an amateur criminal, she's part of a sophisticated operation. Sarah whistled softly. That turns this into a federal investigation. Exactly. The FBI is already involved, and my lawyer believes that by cooperating fully, I can not only clear my name but also be recognized as a protected whistleblower. I closed the laptop and looked directly at Sarah. But there's a decision I need to make, and it will affect how I proceed. What decision? Whether I protect my parents from the consequences or let them face the full reality of Jessica's actions. Sarah crossed her arms. Explain the options. Option 1. I present evidence that my parents were victims of manipulation. They'll likely avoid criminal charges but lose all the money they invested in Jessica's schemes. I paused. Option 2. I let the investigation run its natural course. They face possible charges as accomplices, but Jessica faces the full force of federal law. And which do you prefer? I smiled coldly. After Saturday night, after years of emotional manipulation and toxic favoritism, I'm leaning toward option 2. Zach, Sarah said carefully, I understand your anger. But make sure you're making this decision for the right reason. The reasons are many, I admitted. Anger, yes. But also justice. And the conviction that enablers have responsibility for the consequences of their behavior. Sarah nodded slowly. When do you need to decide? This week. The FBI wants my formal cooperation by Friday. And your parents? Do they know about the investigation? Not yet. But they will very soon. That's when my phone rang. It was my mother. Zach, her voice sounded tense. We need to talk. FBI men showed up at our house this morning asking about Jessica's bank accounts. I looked at Sarah, who had heard clearly. Where are you now, Mom? At the lawyer's office with your father and Jessica. She says you're stalking her, that you manipulated evidence to get revenge for the party. Jessica's audacity impressed me. Even when confronted by federal investigators, she was still trying to control the narrative. Mom, I said calmly, do you want to know the truth about Jessica, or do you want to continue believing her lies? There was a long silence. The truth, she whispered finally. Then meet us at my lawyer's office at 3 o'clock this afternoon. 345 Elm Street. Bring all financial documents related to Jessica's business for the last 3 years. Zach. Mom, this is your chance to find out where your retirement money really went. If you don't show up, I'll assume you'd rather protect Jessica than know the truth. I hung up before she could respond. Sarah watched me carefully. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. If you've been following this journey of family discovery and wondering how someone rebuilds their life after betrayal in their family, subscribe to the channel because the full revelation of Jessica's criminal network was just hours away from exposing a decade of lies. As Sarah and I finalized the details of my professional situation, I knew that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everything would change irrevocably. My parents would have to choose between facing the truth about their favorite daughter or becoming conscious accomplices to her crimes. And for the first time in my adult life, I wouldn't feel the slightest bit of guilt about the consequences of their choice. The war that began with a slap in the face was about to become a revelation that would forever destroy the family narrative they had built to protect Jessica. At 3 o'clock sharp, my parents walked into the office of attorney Marcus Hartwell carrying 2 boxes of papers and expressions that showed they still didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years since the party. My father had that defensive posture he always took when he felt cornered. Jessica wasn't with them. Where is your daughter? Marcus asked directly, without preamble. She said she couldn't come, my mother murmured. that she had an important doctor's appointment. Marcus and I exchanged meaningful glances. It was exactly the kind of evasion we had expected. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," Marcus began, opening a thick folder, "the FBI is investigating a money laundering scheme involving multiple states and at least $350,000. Your daughter Jessica is the primary target of this investigation." My father turned pale. "That's impossible. Jessica may have her faults, but she's not a criminal." "Dad," I interrupted calmly, "Jessica used my identity to open bank accounts at 3 different banks. These are screenshots of the accounts." I slid the first pieces of evidence across the table. My parents leaned forward to examine the documents, their expressions gradually changing from confusion to horror. "My God," my mother whispered, "these accounts are in Zach's name, but these transactions. These are amounts Jessica never had legitimate access to," I finished. "Mom, do you remember the money you lent her for her bakery in December 2021? She nodded hesitantly. $8,000 deposited into your account on December 15th. On the 16th, Jessica transferred that $8,000 to one of these fraudulent accounts. But look at this." I pointed to a specific line on the statements. On the same day, $50,000 of unknown origin was deposited into the same account. Jessica was using your money to legitimize much larger deposits from criminal sources. Marcus took over the presentation. "This is called layering, a classic money laundering technique. Mixing legitimate funds with illegitimate ones to obscure the source." My father shook his head violently. No, this has to be a mistake. Jessica may be irresponsible, but she wouldn't do this to us. To Zach." That's when I presented the devastating evidence. "Dad, do you remember when Jessica said she needed my social security number to include me as a beneficiary on her business life insurance?" He nodded slowly. "She used that information to open all these accounts. But there's more. Thomas Reynolds, the investigator I hired, discovered that Jessica isn't operating alone." Marcus opened a laptop and turned the screen toward my parents. It was surveillance footage showing Jessica in a meeting with 3 people at an upscale restaurant. "This footage is from 3 weeks ago," I explained. "Jessica is coordinating operations with an organized money laundering network that operates in 4 states. In the recording, we could see Jessica passing documents to a man in an expensive suit, clearly discussing details of transactions. The man in the suit is Vincent Carlucci," Marcus explained. "He's been under federal investigation for 2 years for money laundering operations connected to illegal gambling and drug trafficking." My mother covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. "But here's the part that worries me the most," I continued, pulling out another set of documents. "Do you remember Jessica's fake medical emergency in September?" My father nodded mechanically. "The $8,000 you paid for a non-existent surgery? That went straight to Vincent Carlucci. Jessica was using your money to pay off debts to very dangerous people." That's when my phone rang. It was Thomas Reynolds. "Zach," his voice was tense, "I need you to keep your parents at the lawyer's office. Jessica has just been arrested trying to cross the border into Mexico. She was carrying $120,000 in cash and false documents." I put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. "Fake documents?" Marcus asked. "A passport with a false identity, an altered birth certificate, and most disturbing, she had a list of names and addresses of family members of people involved in the federal investigation." My blood ran cold. "What kind of list?" "Including you, Zach. Your work address, your daily schedule, information about Sarah Mitchell. Jessica was sharing information about all of you with Carlucci." The silence in the office was deafening. My parents stared at the phone as if they couldn't process what they had just heard. "She was putting us in danger," my mother whispered. "Not just you," Reynolds continued. "The investigation revealed that Jessica owed Carlucci nearly $200,000. She was planning to use your names and credit to secure larger bank loans to pay off that debt." Marcus leaned forward. "Thomas, are there any outstanding arrest warrants?" "Jessica is in federal custody. Carlucci and 2 associates were arrested this morning in a simultaneous sting operation. The FBI is offering temporary protection for the Patterson family while they investigate possible threats." My father finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Zach, we didn't know. I swear we didn't know. I looked at my parents, really seeing them for the first time in years. Not as the enablers who protected Jessica at any cost, but as two elderly people who had been manipulated and exploited by their own daughter. I know, he said softly. But you have to understand, Jessica didn't stop at the $53,000 you lent her. She was planning to destroy you and me to save her own skin. Marcus closed the laptop. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, you have an important decision to make. You can cooperate fully with the federal investigation and possibly avoid charges as unwitting accomplices, or you can try to protect Jessica and face the legal consequences. My mother looked directly into my eyes. What do you think we should do, Zach? It was the first time in decades that they had asked my opinion about Jessica instead of simply demanding my compliance. I think, I replied carefully, that you should tell them the whole truth. About every loan, every story Jessica told, every document you signed. The complete truth. My father took a deep breath. Even if it hurts Jessica even more. Dad, Jessica has already damaged herself beyond repair. The question now is whether you want to be victims of the investigation or accomplices. It was at that moment that I realized something fundamental. The revenge I had planned was no longer necessary. The truth, when finally exposed completely, was far more devastating than any retaliation I could have conceived. Jessica had completely destroyed herself, taking with her the entire family narrative my parents had constructed to protect her. There was nothing left for me to tear down because she had torn it all down herself. As Marcus explained the next legal steps and Reynolds coordinated our temporary protection, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. The war that began with an assault at my prom had ended in a way none of us could have predicted. Jessica wasn't just irresponsible or manipulative, she was genuinely dangerous, and we had all narrowly escaped much worse consequences. But as I watched my parents process the magnitude of Jessica's betrayal, I knew that the hardest part was still ahead of us, rebuilding a family after its entire foundation had been revealed to be a lie. Marcus's phone rang again. It was the FBI with news that would change everything once more. 6 months after that call from the FBI, I was in federal court watching Jessica get sentenced to 8 years in prison for money laundering, identity fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Vincent Carlucci got 15 years. Her entire network was dismantled. The defendant knowingly exploited family ties to facilitate criminal activity, the judge declared, looking directly at Jessica. This represents a particularly serious breach of trust. My parents, officially classified as victims, avoided criminal charges. But they lost their home and all their retirement savings. The emotional recovery would be much longer than any legal process. How did we not see the signs? My mother asked after the sentencing, her hands shaking. You did see them, I replied gently. You simply interpreted every red flag as an opportunity to help Jessica. Family therapy with Dr. Rachel Simmons helped us rebuild a relationship based on honesty rather than toxic engagement. Sarah Mitchell not only kept me on during the investigation, but offered me the vice president position at the new Seattle branch. Your integrity during this crisis has been exemplary, she said. You've turned personal trauma into leadership. The $100,000 bonus that caused all this to explode? I split it between helping my parents financially and donating to organizations that fight financial crime. A year later, I moved to Seattle. It was a new life, free from toxic family expectations and twisted loyalties. I visited my grandfather's grave the day before I moved, the man who taught me that integrity is worth more than shortcuts. Thank you for showing me that some battles are worth fighting, I whispered to the headstone. I received a letter from Jessica from prison months later. 3 pages of emotional manipulation disguised as apologies. I read it once and threw it in the trash. Some bridges burned should stay burned. Today, 3 years later, I run a division of 50 employees, have built a healthy relationship with Amanda, and my parents visit me in Seattle a few times a year. We have developed clear boundaries, emotional support, yes, but never again financial support without complete transparency. I feel closer to you now, my mother admitted during our last visit, than I have in years. Because now we really know each other, I replied. Not just the roles we played to protect Jessica. Jessica still has 5 years to serve. We don't talk about her, not because it's forbidden, but because we've built a life that doesn't revolve around her absence. What I've learned has completely transformed my understanding of family. It's not about protecting the most troubled at the expense of those responsible, but about creating an environment where everyone thrives through honesty. Loyalty doesn't mean accepting criminal behavior, but having the courage to demand better from those we love. And justice? Justice isn't revenge, it's restoring balance through truth. Jessica tried to destroy my life to save her schemes. But by exposing the truth, I not only protected myself, I protected future victims and created an opportunity for my family to heal. If this story of family manipulation and rebuilding has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how the courage to say no can transform entire lives. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying those who hurt you, it's building a life so full that their attempts to destroy you become irrelevant. Jessica is still in prison. Me? I'm living a life based on truth, something she could never imagine.